On this Sunday night, a dead heat on the eve of Election Day. The Liberals barnstorm across Canada, sharpening attacks on Conservative opponents in a tight battle.
Not leading on vaccinations also means he's not leading on the economy.
The Conservative leader's anti-Trudeau appeal in the final push for votes.
Mr. Trudeau put us into a $600 million election.
Plus, the NDP on the offensive. The ridings, they're trying to swing orange in the last sprint.
We think that Mr. O'Toole and Mr. Trudeau would be bad for Canada.
And a landmark flight. The world's first all-civilian orbital crew makes a safe splashdown.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We are into the final hours of the federal election campaign. Leaders of the three main parties spent time near their home ridings today, where they'll watch the results roll in tomorrow night. After 36 days of campaigning, it could be a photo finish. An Ipsos poll done exclusively for Global News shows the Liberals and Conservatives neck and neck. The Tories are on track to receive 32% of the decided popular vote, while the Liberals would get 31%. The NDP is poised to receive 21% of ballots cast. Every vote is critical, and Liberal leader Justin Trudeau spent his last day on the campaign trail trying to win over as many Canadians as possible. Abigail Bimman is traveling with the Liberal campaign. Abigail.
Justin Trudeau's final day of campaigning is taking him across the country, and at his first stop in Montreal, he made his strongest push yet to link COVID struggles in Western provinces to Conservative leader Erin O'Toole.
We're seeing right now what the wrong choices made in Alberta and Saskatchewan have led to. We do not need a Conservative government that won't be able to show the leadership on vaccinations and on science that we need to end this. Folks in Alberta have a really important choice to make, whether they want Erin O'Toole to continue working with Jason Kenney on not ending this pandemic.
Wrong choices, a strong choice of words, considering Trudeau has been careful about criticizing provincial Conservative leaders, so a pitch to Western voters who largely shut out the Liberals in 2019, and a pitch to progressive voters, which he has been doing more consistently the last few days. Trying to ward off vote splitting for people who would consider voting NDP or Green, Trudeau once again called on those voters to look at the Liberal option, especially on climate change. The party choosing to spend even more time here in southern Ontario, part of a third day in a row, playing both offense and defense with seats they're trying to win and ones they're trying to save. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Niagara Falls, Ontario.
I'm Michael Couteur with the Conservative campaign in Toronto, where instead of hitting the hustings early Sunday, Erin O'Toole went for an 11-kilometer jog before his first mid-morning event.
Okay, that's the warm-up done. You guys ready for the real run now?
There's seemingly no sense of urgency in this last run to the finish line as the Tories target Liberal-held ridings in the vote-rich Toronto suburbs.
It's all about ground game.
A part of that ground game is to hit as many ridings as you can in the final day of campaigning. O'Toole had just 4 events scheduled.
We need Medicare for autism.
In Markham, his message to campaign workers was drowned out by a protester. Even though he had told media he would take questions at the event, O'Toole was whisked out a side door and into a waiting car.
Will you scrum it all today, Mr. O'Toole?
And there remain unanswered questions for O'Toole, like the vaccination status of all of his candidates. Oakville candidate Kerry Colborne is fully vaccinated, and that seems to be an important issue for her electors.
I do get talked about vaccines a fair bit at the door, both people that want mandates and people that don't. So, as I said, I personally believe in vaccination.
But like O'Toole, Colborne says getting vaccinated is a personal choice. O'Toole's former military brother, retired General Rick Hillier, endorsed him Saturday night, but he doesn't seem to share the same opinion as O'Toole when it comes to disclosing candidates' vaccine status.
I don't know all the candidates in the Conservative Party of Canada. I don't know all the ones in the Liberals or the NDP or the Green Party. I'm not sure who's vaccinated or who is not. I think they all should be.
With just hours to go in this race, a senior Conservative source tells Global News there is concern there will be a lot of close ridings in this election. And unlike in 2019, they say there will be no moral victory if the Tories win the popular vote, but still don't form government. Michael Couteur, Global News, Toronto.
I'm Robin Gill with the NDP campaign in Vancouver. BC is the final stop for Jagmeet Singh. It's home to his riding, and it's the province where the party has the most support. The odds are against Jagmeet Singh becoming Prime Minister, but he can play a pivotal role in a minority government. When asked if he could support the Conservatives, he didn't rule that out.
I would say to someone who's worried about what's going to happen next that let's just look at what's happened in the past Parliament.
Ideologically, he's more aligned with the Liberals, but he's taken a lot of shots at Justin Trudeau.
In the past 6 years, Mr. Trudeau was in government, and so our critique is going to be about government decisions, naturally. And Mr. Trudeau was in power for those 6 years, so we want people to know these are the decisions that he made, and this is what we think is wrong with those decisions.
The NDP has spent most of its time on the offensive. In what's known as the classic whistle stop, Singh has hit 8 ridings in the Vancouver area on the final day. The NDP needs to get more than the 24 seats the party won in the last election. Say you don't grow more seats or it's very minimal, do you think you will have failed your party?
No, we're confident that we're going to do well in this campaign.
It's the end of a short campaign with long hours. Singh's personal popularity has polled high consistently, but parlaying that into votes has been challenging in the past. Still, with a minority government in the forecast, he could be back on the campaign trail very soon. Even Jagmeet Singh described it as Groundhog Day. Neetu?
Robin Gill reporting tonight in Vancouver. Thanks, Robin. We may not even know the true outcome of the election by tomorrow night. More than 1.2 million special ballot voting kits were issued this campaign, which include those mail-in ballots. Elections Canada expects the majority will be counted by Wednesday, but says the full count could take up to 4 days. We will have extensive coverage on election night Monday, anchored by Global National's Donna Friesen, right here on Global Television, as well as on History, Global News Radio, and various online platforms, including globalnews.ca. The revealing of hundreds of unmarked graves near former residential school sites this year prompted a national reckoning. But separating Indigenous kids from their home communities and families is not just a part of Canada's painful past. There are more Indigenous children in the child welfare system today than at the height of residential schools. Within the last 2 decades, hundreds of those children have died. Heather Yurex-West looks at the deaths of 7 children in Alberta and why advocates hope this federal election will finally lead to change.
Whitney, Josh, and Greg were aged 2, 4, and 6. Camden was 8. Chara and Sky were teenagers, and Trevor just 20. The group of 7 Alberta First Nations children and youth died within a 14-month period in 2018-2019. Their deaths the result of an accidental fire, drug toxicity, sepsis, and homicide, all within 2 years of receiving child intervention services. Alberta's Child and Youth Advocate investigated their deaths in a recent report. 9 children died during that period, but the fact that 7 were Indigenous doesn't take advocate Cindy Blackstock by surprise.
We've seen that children, when they're removed from their families and placed in child welfare care, are at higher risk for all kinds of harms.
Several decades after Canada closed the last residential schools, the child welfare system appears to have taken its place. Each year, thousands of First Nations children are taken into the system. Changing that is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's #1 call to action. But progress has been slow.
The good news is all of us can pressure all candidates of all parties to stop it, because they can.
A big part of the problem, Blackstock says, is that federally funded social services for Indigenous people receive far less than provincially funded services non-Indigenous people in Canada receive. She's been fighting the Government of Canada in court for equitable funding for child welfare since 2016.
I was born into foster care in British Columbia.
For Ashley Bach, the issue is deeply personal. The 27-year-old began advocating for other Indigenous foster kids soon after she aged out of care.
Essentially, it's transitioning into adulthood, but in many cases, it's more like being abandoned. And one of my youngest siblings now is in the process of aging out of care, and as much as it hurts to say this, the system really hasn't changed much.
Bach says she was heartened to hear the issue of Indigenous kids in care brought up during the English language federal leaders debate. She says she hopes more Canadians will think about these children when they cast a ballot on Election Day. Heather Yurex-West, Global News, Calgary.
More than 250 Afghans arrived in Canada this weekend and will soon begin a new life. They arrived at Toronto's Pearson International Airport Saturday afternoon via the U.S. Those on board included Afghan nationals and refugees, as well as interpreters and others who previously assisted Canadian forces during the mission in Afghanistan. The new arrivals will have to stay in COVID-19 quarantine before moving on to the communities they'll call home. Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Minister Marco Mendicino says the new arrivals were relieved to be out of danger following the Taliban seizing control of the country 1 month ago. More than 2,000 people have arrived since that time. The Canadian government has promised to resettle 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan. In the capital, Kabul, women rallied outside the building that housed the country's Women's Affairs Ministry before the Taliban takeover. The militant Islamist group has rebranded it the Ministry for Preaching and Guidance and the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. It's one of the latest moves raising concerns about the future of women's and girls' rights. Today, the Taliban-appointed interim mayor of Kabul told female city employees to remain home, with the exception of those whose jobs could not be filled by men. The Taliban has also imposed measures limiting or preventing access to education for women and girls.
I'm Ross Lord in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. There's widespread apprehension here as a provincial government that's drowning in debt considers how to fix the finances without punishing its people. That story coming up on Global National.
There is fear in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador about what's coming next. As we reported yesterday, a crippling financial crisis has Liberal Premier Andrew Furey considering his options. As Ross Lord reports, Newfoundlanders are struggling to foresee a solution that doesn't cause more pain.
With the worst debt load and highest unemployment in Canada, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador has signaled a shakeup is coming to straighten out the province's finances. Even $5 billion in federal funding for cost overruns at the Muskrat Falls Hydro project won't solve the crisis, something most Newfoundlanders seem to recognize.
We need to get things back on track, and kind of relying on the federal government to bail us out is not a reliable solution.
Truly fixing the finances could mean making structural changes, something Premier Andrew Furey has yet to do. As Furey considers his options, the province is in a state of apprehension.
We're all waiting on the edge, seeing things get worse, with the potential that maybe oil prices may get a bit better in the next couple of years. But at some point here, we need someone to stand up and say, I know this is going to hurt, but we're going to pull that tooth.
For now, Furey is keeping people guessing. Through his office, he agreed to an interview with Global News, then abruptly pulled out, and there was no response to our request to reschedule. Among those most nervous about what's coming are the province's public servants. They wonder if their crowded parking lots will soon be thinned out. Their union cautions the government against cutting services to the public, like health care.
That's a concern now, trying to balance how we deal with things, not making big mistakes that will have a further negative consequence here in our province.
A province that's endured a series of economic collapses, including the COD moratorium, is once again on the brink of financial disaster. It's the result of a big increase in government spending when oil prices were high, followed by the crash in oil prices, then the pandemic. To successful business owners like Todd Perrin, it's a shame, considering his province is a warehouse of natural resources.
Be it fisheries, be it oil and gas, whatever you feel about how we should be prosecuting the oil and gas industry, hydro, forestry, mining, it's a huge warehouse of all of the things that the world wants and needs.
He hopes the province will realize its full potential once and for all after it emerges from its latest financial crisis. Ross Lord, Global News, St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Coming up, a French slackliner wows the crowd with epic Eiffel Tower entertainment. A frightening sight on the Spanish island of La Palma today. A volcano is erupting, shooting huge plumes of smoke and lava into the sky. Authorities immediately evacuated more than 1,000 people, but Spain's civil guard now says it may need to evacuate up to 10,000 residents. A French daredevil is taking entertainment to new heights in Paris. The 27-year-old tightrope artist thrilled thousands of onlookers along the banks of the Seine River. He walked 600 meters on a slack line, more than 70 meters above the ground. The tightrope star even performed some stunts along the way. Space history has been made again. The first all-amateur crew to circle the world without an astronaut aboard has safely returned to Earth. SpaceX founder Elon Musk picked them as his first rocket-riding tourists. And as Jennifer Johnson reports, 4 more flights with paying customers are coming soon.
A Dragon continuing to descend.
The SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule made a splashy entrance back to Earth with 4 space tourists aboard.
Inspiration 4, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home to planet Earth. Your mission has shown the world that space is for all of us.
Godspeed, Inspiration 4. No professional astronaut was on this trailblazing 3-day trip to space. 38-year-old billionaire Jared Isaacman chartered the flight, paying undisclosed millions for himself and 3 guests.
So a big part of our mission here at Inspiration 4 is to inspire what can be done here in space.
Isaacman aimed to raise $200 million for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, donating $100 million himself. SpaceX founder Elon Musk donated another $50 million. One of the tourists aboard was a St. Jude physician assistant who was a bone cancer patient at the hospital nearly 2 decades ago and did some research while in space.
It's been really interesting to see how fluid shifts with this microgravity environment, and that's something that scientists are looking at. And so we are happy to contribute with that.
Arsenault's journey was an inspiration for her young cancer patients who did a question and answer session with the space tourists.
Can you fall in space since there is no gravity?
I have to say that floating is, I don't know if you saw, I always called that peanut M&M. Floating is so much fun.
What's your favorite space food?
My favorite space food is pizza, which I had yesterday.
Looks like a smooth ride for the crew.
The capsule literally ran circles around other space tourism competitors, going 161 kilometers past the International Space Station and orbiting the Earth 15 times a day. And there will be more. Early next year, 3 businessmen paying $55 million each will fly to the space station, accompanied by NASA astronauts. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
A boxing star from the Philippines is getting ready to throw his hat into a different ring by running for president of his country in 2022.
We are ready to rise to the challenge of leadership.
42-year-old boxer and Senator Manny Pacquiao accepted the nomination of his party, saying Filipinos are ready for a change of government. President Rodrigo Duterte, who led a brutal war against illegal drugs, is constitutionally unable to seek a second 6-year term, but has accepted a vice presidential nomination. Up next, the federal candidate in BC going from Paralympian to politician. There may be thousands of people across the country running in this election, hoping to become a member of parliament. But there's no one quite like Josh Vandervees. This week, our Mike Armstrong has been looking at candidates with interesting backstories. And tonight, he introduces us to the Liberal candidate in the riding of Vancouver East. He's a former Paralympian, a man with no arms, no legs, and as you'll see, no limits.
Yes. 1, 2, 3. All right.
He isn't one to beat around the bush.
Josh!
Invited to speak this week to the Vancouver East End Boys Club, Josh Vandervees opens with a question.
Think to yourselves, what would it be like if you didn't have any arms and legs?
Now, Vandervees has spent a lifetime working on breaking the ice, making that first impression to put people he meets at ease. Not a bad skill to have if you're running for office.
When I was a boy, I learned how to write by holding the pen or pencil between my arm and cheek and writing like this. And it's ironic because the teachers always said I had the best handwriting in the class.
The other skill that's translated well is what Vandervees does with things that scare him. He says he was terrified making the jump into politics and starting this campaign.
Ignoring fear is just what it's all about. Growth happens outside of your comfort zone.
Well, Vandervees has lived a life outside what most would consider a comfort zone, and he's not really a big fan of being told he can't do something. He was born without arms and legs, and with very supportive parents, developed an aversion to limiting himself. As a boy, he says he watched Jean Chrétien and dreamed of going into politics.
Excellent.
Not for the power, but for the profile, the chance to be seen and make people think.
Oh, can the MP in my riding, can he actually get into my store? Or are there stairs? Or, are we designing vehicles that work for someone in a wheelchair like my MP?
Nice, Sean.
Vandervees spent a decade as a Paralympian competing in bocce. He won a bronze medal in London in 2012. After that, he went to law school and, as a lawyer, works with not-for-profit groups. He's married with a daughter and a stepson, and has held on to that passion for taking on challenges. His opponent got more than 50% of the vote in the last election.
It's not my first uphill battle.
Having the odds against him doesn't seem like something Vandervees lets get in his way. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
What an inspiration. And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight, your Canada is Esterhazy, Saskatchewan. Donna Friesen will be back at the anchor desk tomorrow, and she will host our special election coverage throughout the evening. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.